Okay, my friends, where were we? We were at Prophet Muhammad, at the birth of Prophet Muhammad, right? In the midst of this scene, right? In the midst of this international context, right? Between the Romans, basically, and the Iranians, right? The continuation of the Romans, right, and the Iranians, but they're in their Greek sort of uh, form, right? Um, okay, here we have a miniature showing how Prophet Muhammad sort of, wanted to share the black stone that he would later on put on the house of God, what became the house of God, or the Kaaba in Mecca, right? A black stone which became a very important sort of stone in Islamic history, right? Of the Kaaba, right? He had the representatives of various tribes, right, bringing it into its uh, an apportioned sort of place, right? Here, here is the dream that Prophet Muhammad is said to have had, to have gone from I forget now whether it's Mecca or Medina. I should know this, my friends. And to Jerusalem, right, all the way to Jerusalem in his dreams, right, overnight, right, through the angel Gabriel, right, where he goes to Jerusalem, right, he prays with all the rest of the prophets in Jerusalem in front of God, right? So anyway, but at the age of 40, which is a very telling age, a lot happens at 40 according to our classical authors, right? Prophet Muhammad is called to prophethood, right? 610. This is, yeah, he's 40 years old. He has been going with caravan trades, right, according to traditional story from Mecca, right, to Syria here, and uh, and uh, and this is happening, and then but Mecca is a place where the all the tribes of Arabia, right, was the house of idols. The story, the Islamic narrative has it, was the house of idol. Each tribe had an idol, 300 and something idols in the Kaaba itself, right? And polytheistic religion, right? Polytheistic, many gods, right? Um, gods, like the classical world, they assumed anthropomorphic, i.e., human dimensions, right? Anthropomorphic, right? This is POMO, more ORPHIC, anthropomorphic. Gods, they had hands, they have eyes, they have, yeah, and so on and so forth. And it is in one of his um, and he is a very sort of spiritual person. He is known as a trustworthy person, right, amongst the tribes, and there are of course tribal rivalries and whatnot. And Prophet Muhammad comes and says, forget about your polytheism, forget about your anthropomorphism, although Quran has some anthropomorphism in it, and forget about your idols. There is no God but God, right? Allah, right? Allah, excuse me, is the Allah is the Arabic terminology for God, right? And the roots of it comes from al, which means the, right? And elaha, which means small g God. When you say the God, therefore it becomes the God, therefore it becomes cap G God, right? Therefore it becomes Al Ilaha, therefore it becomes Allah. And those of you who know Hebrew, yeah, we're talking about Semitic languages, we're talking about Hebrew, we're talking about Arabic, right? And all of you who know Hebrew know that in Hebrew, God is called Elohim, right? So he comes and says to the tribes, right? Forget about all your gods, right? There is no God, but my God, the God that I introduce, yeah, but Allah, right? Strict monotheism, right? And of course, in trade, involved in trade and um, and certainly involved in the political, somehow involved in the political uh, uh, history of the area, somehow involved. I will be at some point writing a book about this, my friends, but I cannot, we don't have that much time to go about it. So anyway, so Prophet Muhammad comes and he has called to prophethood, and during the times that he goes for prayers in top of a particular mountain near Mecca, he begins to hear ayahs or verses of the Quran, verses of the Quran. He begins to receive verses of the Quran, which the story goes, he would then come to his companions in Mecca, and those who have begun to believe in him. The first one is his wife Khadija, and then his cousin. One of the first ones is his cousin Ali, as well as some other close political sort of associates, right? And they begin to sort of spread the message, so to speak, and these verses, right, ultimately become gathered in surahs. A number of verses come to make up as the surahs, and there are 114 surahs in the Quran, right, my friends, and they are sort of arranged from the longest to the shortest. At any rate, the Prophet Muhammad, part of the story goes, he became not only a statesman, right, because he assumed the authority. He was the representative of this one and only God, right, a statesman as well as a prophet, right, the story goes, during this period, right, him and his followers begin to be persecuted by the polytheistic, powerful sort of tribe from which he's coming from, which is the tribe of Quraysh, right? And this persecution is so much, right, that in 622 CE, the Prophet Muhammad and his compatriots make a journey from Mecca to Medina. Of course, there is a previous journey to Ethiopia, right, which is extremely, curious but has to do with the trade routes as well, right? And him and his followers make a journey from Mecca to Medina, right? They go from Mecca to Medina, my friends. Okay. They go from Mecca to Medina, right, in 622, and that, which is an act which is known as Hijrah, right, meaning to immigrate, right, and the year 622 becomes the year of Muslim lunar calendar, right? The year is 622, the first, excuse me, the first year of Hijrah, right? My friends. And you see that this Hijrah is taking place in the midst of the Sasanian-Byzantine wars, right? So, by 632, Prophet Muhammad dies. 632, Prophet Muhammad dies, but in Medina, right? But he has not established a successor. Islam doesn't have a priesthood. Who is supposed to come to follow him? This notion of who is supposed to come and follow him makes the first schism, right, in the history of Islam as a religion between Shi'is, who argued that rule, right, authority has to remain in the family of the Prophet, and the Sunnis, who came to argue that no, there should be an elective assembly for choosing the successor to the Prophet, right? Ultimately, of course, it is the Sunnis that win on some level, right? If you become the orthodoxy, so to speak. So Haram, here is a sacred space, So Kaaba, which means basically a cubicle, right, is actually a sacred space, the figurative sort of house of God, right, to which millions and millions of Muslims, if they are able, right, make a journey, right, in the month of pilgrimage, right, and they go to the Kaaba, right, and this is, okay. So this is ostensibly following the practice of Prophet Muhammad, right? Okay, so Prophet Muhammad dies, right? After Prophet Muhammad dies, and this sort of argument begins, which is a political argument, completely political argument, begins, so to speak, between the Sunnis, who are really not the Sunnis. It's only in retrospect that we're calling them the Sunnis, and the Shiis, who are really not the Shiis. It's only in retrospect. Between two factions, right? In the war that takes place between the two factions, it is settled that the family of the Prophet will, for the time being, be left out of the picture. So you have four, what you call the rightly guided caliphs, right, who come to rule after the Prophet Muhammad's and death in 632, and they rule until 661, and by that time they have brought all the um, uncontrollable sort of tribes of Arabia under their control during this period of rightly guided caliphate. Don't look at this; it is totally wrong, my friends. Right? Okay. So rightly guided caliphs. Right? By the time after the rightly guided caliphs, yeah, through the rightly guided caliphs, you begin to have the conquest, right? Especially the conquest of Iran and the conquest of Syria, right? The Arab conquest of Syria, right? From Syria, they get from whom? From Byzantium, of course. They sever Syria from Byzantium. The sort of um, the new how should I put it? The new they take Syria, right, and they basically toppled in 651. They toppled the Sasanians from power, right? Parthian rulers remain here and here, yeah, in Iran, but okay. They have controlled Syria, and then there comes, yeah, this period of rightly guided caliphs. Just for you to know, I'm not going to ask you from this Abu Bakr, yeah, Omar, Osman, and Ali, yeah, from these four rightly guided caliphs, right, three of them are not related to Prophet Muhammad. The last one, right, is Ali. He is the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet. He has married the daughter of the Prophet, Fatima, right, my friends, and and therefore the schism continues. Osman is assassinated, as Ali is also assassinated, right? And this has nothing to do with Islam, one thing or the other, because really, I mean, just as there was no Christianity to speak of in the year one of in the first 300 years of Christianity, basically, right? All the Islamic dogma and whatnot begins to take shape from late 8th century onwards, right? From 750s onwards, right? Except for the Quran, right? Which is supposed to be the speech of God to Prophet Muhammad, right? Which makes it holy, right? Okay, which is supposed to be contemporaneous with the Prophet Muhammad, of course, right? So you have Prophet Muhammad. After he dies, you have the rightly guided caliph, right, through which the conquests begin, right? And then you have, after the rightly guided caliphs, again, from one of the caliphs who are not connected to the Prophet Muhammad's family, you have the Umayyad Empire, or Umayyad Caliphate established. That goes from 661 to 749, right? Caliph, the notion of a caliph, right, means someone who comes after. Simply that, right? Khalafa is from the Arabic word khalafa, right, my friends? And it means simply he who comes after, right? So the caliphate, right, are the political authorities that come after the Prophet Muhammad, right? There is no reason to call this an Islamic empire because the majority of the population are not Muslims, right? There is no reason to call this Islamic conquest, right? Because the majority of the population that went on conquest were not Arabs, right? But we talk about this, we talk about Islamic conquest, we talk about the Shi'i Sunni sectarianism, we talk about all of these things as if they were, right, as if there was such a thing as an Islamic empire. If you have ever heard of a Christian empire, then you can use, which you haven't, right? Then you can use the notion of an Islamic empire, right? Throughout the Umayyad period, the majority of the population are non-Muslims, right? And non-Muslims are intermingling with other non-Muslims. And it is through this give and take, which is the case with all religions, right, that new ideas developed. At any rate, the Muslims are a minority in a sea of non-Muslims during the Umayyad period. But look at what happens during the Umayyad period. They conquer, okay, now I have to say it, they conquer, Arabs come and conquer most of North Africa. Of course, they cannot come and how many of them do you think they were, right? No standing army. Okay, it means that the local populations must have welcomed their rule, or must have had no preference, right, in keeping the Byzantine Empire, the Byzantine rule. For one thing, they did not have exactly the same religion, right? And of course, one can go into the causes of conquest and the implications of Arab conquest quite a bit. But what I want to get to here, my friends, is that it is during this Umayyad period that the Arabs, right, in 711, right, passed remember, the Strait of Gibraltar, which is basically the Strait of, in Arabic, Jabal, which means mountain, Al-Tariq, which was actually the Berber, not the Arab, the Berber conqueror, right, of Spain, and as a result, Gibraltar becomes anglicized, and these Atlas Mountains in Morocco, right, become known as the mountain of At-Tariq, Gibraltar, right? And they go into Spain. They go into Spain 711, right? And they are in Spain until basically give and take, right, in one form or another, until 1400s, when they are conquered by the Spanish Reconquista, right, in the 15th century. But what I want you to keep in mind is that Spain has 5 centuries, therefore gets 5 centuries of how would you like to put it? Islamic control, Arab control, none of them are appropriate, right? They have 5 centuries of cultural infusion, right, of the culture of Western Asia and Africa into their cultural sort of hemisphere, right? I want you to keep that in mind. And they go even to France, right? And they are sort of stopped in France at the Battle of Toulouse. I'm not going to ask all of this from you, just for your information, right? In the Battle of Toulouse, right? I mean, I want you to know the Wyatt Empire, right? that we had an Umayyad Empire, that we had a rightly guided caliphs, a period of rightly guided caliphs, and another empire after this. But I don't want you to know the details of this. It would be nice for you to know that the caliph means to come after, right? And so on and so forth. But anyway, it is what I want you to know is that in the 8th century, the whatever Arab, Islamic, Berber, West Asian, however you call it, cultural tradition, political tradition, and whatnot reaches into France, right? Reaches into France, and they are only stopped by Martel, Charles Martel, who is the grandfather of Charlemagne the Great, right? So Charlemagne becomes a contemporary of the next caliphate that comes to power after 750, right? And that is the Aposite Caliphate. That goes basically from 750 in one way form or another to 1258, by which time the Mongols, right, my friends, Baghdad. This is the general history of this period. But what I want you to keep in mind is that it is from the late Umayyad period into the Abbasid period, right, that a translation movement begins to take place. All the knowledge that had been thus far created by the Greeks, by the Iranians, by the Indians, by the Hebrews, by the Christians, by the Africans, right? All of this knowledge, right, begins to be translated into Arabic. So, from philosophical textbooks to mathematical textbooks to astronomy to to medicine, to botany, to all the, yeah? Not only is all the knowledge this way translated and synthesized, right? But new knowledge is created, right? By the Western Asians, a good number of whom, right, are also happen to be Iranians. But okay, that's besides the point. But here is the crux of the matter. It is through the transmission of these ancient sciences, right? Through the transmission of the cumulative knowledge that has taken place and has been gathered, right, in the river valley civilizations, right, of Asia, and don't forget China, right, of Asia, right, it is all that knowledge that is synthesized, is accumulated, and it's translated into Arabic, and through Spain, and through France, and through Sicily, and through Italy. The Muslims conquered Sicily during the Abbasid period also, right? Yeah, Umayyad period also, right? And it is all that knowledge that gets transferred into Europe. And therefore, we get from 750s onwards, we get this golden age of the so-called Islamic civilization, where all the sciences in astronomy, in mathematics, in physics, in chemistry, in medicine, in philosophy, and whatnot, between 8,000 to 1000 CE, right? All the scientists from all over the world gather to the newly created capital of the Abbasids in Baghdad, right? In Baghdad, and they begin interchanging knowledge, right? creating knowledge, and so on and so forth, right? So the minority Muslims, right, are dealing with the Jews, the Christians, the Greeks, the Iranians, the minority Arabs, you might say, right, or Muslims, right, are dealing with all these populations, and they create the first international scientific sort of venture in history. And it is through this period of our history, of our collective history, that finally, right, all the achievements of Asia, right, or and Africa are transmitted into Western Europe, where they laid the foundations of the Renaissance, right? You're talking about sciences in optometry. You're talking about medicine and physiognomy. You're talking about astrolabes and astronomy, right? And you're talking of bringing the whole notion of zero from Hindu numerals, right? Adding it to mathematics and creating what is it? The Arabic numerals? No, but you have created in the Hindu Arabic numerals so that, right, you can write your letters of your numbers, right, in say, you can say the year 2020, right? A very sad year in human history, right? You can write it like this and not say with your Arabic numerals and Hindu numerals, the writing of which, I cannot write 2020 in that, right? You could go to, I don't know, 20, 31, 32, 33, right? And then once you get to 34, 35, it becomes more and more complicated, right? Nothing as simple as this, right? Through which you can get the concept of zero from India. You can get the technology of making paper for the first time, right? Getting it from the Chinese, right? And then transmitting it to so-called Western Europe. You develop your astronomy, you establish, after the practice of the Sasanians, you establish a house of wisdom, right, where all the scientists come together to develop such sciences as algebra, trigonometry, astronomical sciences, engineering, innovations in medicine, in surgery, my friends, right? And whatever, right, whenever you come in sort of across any noun that is made by the letter al, know that Islamic sciences, Arabic sciences, Asian sciences have something to do with it, like algebra, right? Algebra, which is by the Iranian scientist Al-Khwarizmi, right? And you have the creation of the science of algebra, as I said, other Islamic sciences, right? And you have the whole notion of quote-unquote Islamic science and the making of European Renaissance by one of the major sort of historians of the field, um, in um, in relationship to Europe, right? So and here, for instance, you have a European sort of scholar and quote unquote Arab scholar, right, practicing geometry. And this is a 15th century manuscript, my friends. So, excuse me, um, my friends, we have come a full circle, right? We have come a full circle in the history of our world history, right? We started from Sumeria and Mesopotamia and Egypt, and we went into Anatolia, and we made this sweeping tour of human history until finally, right, the knowledge of Asia gets transmitted. The knowledge that was accumulated for the most part in Asia and Africa is transmitted to Europe, and we get the European Renaissance. Those of you who know Spanish or French, you know that ne, right, means to be born, right? Renaissance, to be reborn, right? Reborn from where the story goes from, our origins, right, in Europe, right, of the Greco Roman civilization, right? But as we learned, by the time the Greco-Roman civilization comes into the picture, right, Western Asia and Africa has already advanced, right, for close to 2 millennia and a half, and will further advance, right? And in fact, the only reason that we know of the Greco-Roman scientific achievements, right, is through the works that were translated, right, by Western Asian scientists and African scientists, right, into Arabic, and from there into European languages, and in order to form the basis of Renaissance. I hope you enjoyed the course, my friends. I hope you enjoyed my lectures. I hope you learned a lot. I hope I communicated to you the broad outlines of our collective history, our world history, right? And I hope that I have highlighted for you the numerous pitfalls, right, of the ways in which we used to view our Western civilization, right? And I hope to have convinced you that we are talking about, if what we are talking about in terms of our human history is our world history and world civilization, right? Which, as we have seen, has been multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multinational already in ancient times, already in historic times, right? From 3000 BCE onwards, right? And it is not the story of Western civilization that we should be talking about, because that is the rhetoric of your ultra-right right now. It is the rhetoric of the Trump land, right? Which we are trying to stay away from as much as possible because it will be very harmful to the continuity of our world civilization and world history and camaraderie of an international camaraderie that we must develop, right? And a national camaraderie that has to develop and go beyond our national borders into an international context, my friends. I hope I have given you a glimpse of this history, my friends, and I hope that you will take this knowledge with you in your life. You will built on this knowledge in your life, my friends, and it will be the perspective that you will share with your friends and your families and your dear ones while you stay safe and sound, yeah, and brilliant as you ever were, right, in the years to come. I bid you farewell, and I will have sort of um, instructions for you for the finals in my messages to come. Yeah, I wish you the best of luck, my friends, and best of success. And I wish you go out. I wish that you could go out there and 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 get what you deserve and become a brilliant citizen of the world in your future life. I bid you farewell. Bye.